The next step in our sort of Godzilla puppeteering project is to import our Photoshop file. So if I go over here and I find my Photoshop file, which has all the different layers built into it, I can actually just grab it and drag it right over here. It'll give me a couple different options to import it as footage, composition, or composition with retaining layer sizes, which is exactly what we want. And it's going to import them, and it's actually going to create a composition for us with everything in it, which is exactly what we want. So if I go through, it'll reveal all the different missing pieces, and so those are good. And then we know that this layer with the missing arm, we don't want to move around too much, so I'm actually going to hide that. And this layer with the masked out background, we don't want to move, so I'm going to hide that. But we do need to see the normal background, so that's okay, but it's, fully in the background, so I'm not too worried. And so I'll activate my shy layers, and all of those will disappear. And now I just have my two working layers and then my reference background. And then from here, all you really have to do is start putting in pins. So if you go up to your puppet position pin tool, you can start laying them down. And generally speaking, the rule is you put them where joints are. And so I start off with the joints that I know aren't going to move too much, but things will hinge around their standard movement. So I'll put one in the tail here, and I'll put one up here, and then I'm going to put some in the like basically in the feet and that kind of thing that won't move back and forth, and they won't turn too much. And then I want to add ones that will turn, not there. So I'm going to jump over and do Puppet Advanced Pin Tool, which will give us rotational and scaling options. Obviously, we won't want to scale this too much because it'll just end up looking very strange, but the rotational function is extraordinarily easy for moving his arm back and forth. So I'll put one there, and then I'll come back over here and I'll put one in the hand, and then I'll put one in the center of the tail, and maybe in each knee, and then one in the neck. And then I got to go up to the top here into my arm and lay down one at the elbow, and I'll do a standard position tool in the shoulder and one in the hand, and that way we can drag it back and forth. And so as you can see, the mesh will begin to morph and change accordingly based on what sort of pin you put in it. And you can just grab them and rotate them back and forth. And then if you want to, you can kind of sort of click and drag and lasso a bunch of them together if you want to move them as a unit, which I find to be an extraordinarily simple and easy way to do this. Now, we have a massive timeline here, so we'll start off by lassoing all of these keyframes. If you hit U, it'll expose only the ones with keyframes. And we're just going to drag them to the very beginning because this is where the playhead was when we started working here. So I'll grab all those and just drag them right over to the start, and then go up to the top again, and we're going to do the same thing with this. You grab these and drag them over as well. And so now we're set and ready to go, and we're going to start animating. So this is a huge timeline for what I'm doing. 45 seconds is way more than I want to play. I want to make Godzilla dance for, so I'm just going to grab my work area, drag it down to maybe 5 seconds, and then right click and say trim comp to work area. And that'll make the entire composition about 5 seconds long. And even that may be a little bit long for me. So I'll jump forward 30 frames thereabouts, and I'm going to start putting in new keyframes just by selecting what I want and going down to Puppet. And once you select any one of them, your mesh will show up. If you don't want to see the mesh, you can just uncheck it here. But from here, I just want to start clicking and dragging these around. And so it tends to be the case that you got to move a whole bunch of them all at the same time in order for it to look even moderately realistic. And it's never really going to look realistic. This is very much for the camp factor of all of this. So just be aware that if you're hoping to do an animation from a cutout like this, it tends to carry the weight of sort of Monty Python-esque styles of collage animation or cutout animation, that kind of thing. And so as I move back and forth and I change my playhead location, it's going to start to create these animations. I'm going to move this tail over here, and some of the tricks that I found while doing this, if you have a tail or you have something going off in the woods like that, you can kind of shorten this up and then change the rotation here so that it goes in one single direction, and it'll actually end up looking slightly like foreshortening and having the tail move in space. And actually, if I had put this pin right at the very end of the tail, then it would have an easier time doing that. So I highly recommend kind of playing around and getting an idea for exactly what this needs to look the way that you're hoping to. And it's definitely pretty finicky. And oftentimes I do find that when I'm moving something in the base of the person, I sort of have to move all of these together somewhat illogically in my head as I'm doing it. But it ends up looking slightly more realistic because, and I didn't set keyframes for those. Because when you think of how an animal moves or how a person in a Godzilla suit moves, it actually requires a fair amount of sort of center of gravity. Now, I didn't do an extraordinarily amazing job actually animating these, but I'm just going to jump over to a fully animated one to give you an idea of what it actually might look like if you spent more than 2.5 minutes trying to animate this. And I do stress that this was not all that much more than 2.5 minutes. I'd say it's closer to 10, but you can, this is what it will end up looking like with all the weird shifting and everything. And then if you really, really want to, you can drag your comp to the very end here. And what I've done is I've taken all of these keyframes and I've copied them and I've pasted them at the very end of the composition, and then drag the work area to the very last keyframe, right click and say trim comp to work area, and what you'll have is a 3-second long loop that you can then export as a GIF, or you can export as a video and then turn into a GIF, or you can export as a video or as like some background piece. But that's just a very easy way to sort of make something short slightly longer.